Welcome, everyone. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. We have a great show for you today to talk about all things West Asia. We are going to be talking in particular about Iran. When is that strike going to come? We're also going to talk about all of the various reports that have come as the Trump administration looms on the horizon, reports about the situation with the resistance, reports about Israel's overall position. It has been an eventful period in West Asia, and the world is changing dramatically as we speak. But without further ado, our special guest is here today to dispel the myth from the reality, and that is Professor Mohammad Marandi. He is a returning guest and a university professor at the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, it's great to be back with you again today.
Thank you very much, Danny. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. So, Professor Marandi, before we get started, I'm just going to let the audience know that they can hit that like button to boost the stream in the algorithm. They can also go to the video description where they can find your X account to follow all of your reports and your work there, all of your interviews that you do. Also, in the video description, all the places you can support this channel from Patreon, Substack, PayPal, and much more. But without further ado, Professor Marandi, I wanted to discuss with you the overall situation that we're seeing with regard to Iran. So Israel is saying, Professor Marandi, that it hit a component of Iran's nuclear program in its late October strike. U.S. officials have been claiming this is the case. Benjamin Netanyahu is claiming this is the case. And there's also rumors that Iran is waiting for the Trump administration to enter office before it makes any kind of decision about a strike. Now, Iran's foreign ministry has been on record saying, no, it is going to strike Israel. And it's just that the date is not clear yet. Professor Marandi, what is the reality here vis-a-vis Iran and Israel? Because what it seems like is that Israel is trying to paint itself as victorious after its late October strike. What's the reality?
We should also discuss the E3, the British, the French, and the Germans who want to censure Iran over its nuclear program. We have the IAEA meeting and the report on Iran that has come out, and the Europeans, I think, want to censure Iran, which I think it's more linked to a pattern where the Biden regime, the Europeans, the British, they all want to escalate, whether it's the ATACMS or whether it's the fake allegations on the Trump assassination, or whether it's the rush to send aid to Ukraine before January the 20th, or the plan to, or the threat to censure Iran at the International Atomic Energy Agency by the European these three countries. All of these, in my opinion, are more about US politics. And the fact that the current White House and its European allies, they want to escalate between the United States and others so that when Trump comes to power, he is met with multiple crises. So sort of to lock him into, or to put him in a corner and to prevent him from probably making the sort of changes both inside the United States and abroad that he has been speaking about. But the Israeli regime claims about an Iranian military program or a nuclear weapons program is fake. And I think the evidence is quite clear. If they really carried out something big against Iran, there would be evidence of it. They have all sorts of satellites over Iran. The Americans have the most advanced satellites. They could provide the imagery. Also, if there are major explosions, people would have seen it or heard it. And if it was a nuclear site, then you would have, I suspect, contamination, radioactive contamination. So where is that radioactive contamination? I think in general, the problem is that the Israelis failed in the attack. Not that they didn't hit a few places or radar sites or empty buildings or unimportant buildings, or not radar sites, but maybe segments of radar sites. Uh, but in general, they failed. They said, if you recall, they said that they're going to hit Iran in a way in which they wouldn't know what hit them, and it would change the region. Well, things in Iran are normal, and the region is still pretty much like it was a few weeks ago. So I don't take it seriously. I think the Israelis need to uh, feed this sort of propaganda to their own people, to make the Israeli population feel satisfied about how the wars are going. And the Americans and the Europeans will repeat whatever the Israeli regime says. It's not as if they're going to say that the Israelis are lying or that the Israelis are exaggerating. Western media will, support the Israelis and whatever, regardless of what sort of propaganda they put out, and they will support the Israelis as long as they're killing Palestinians. They will be with them until the last Palestinian is killed, if they can get there. So I wouldn't take anything that the Israelis say seriously. I actually did a tweet and also said that, and I said probably the Iranian moon base has also been destroyed, and its Arctic base has also been destroyed too by the Israelis. So uh, that's how I see it.
Right. There obviously is a lot of bluster coming from the Israeli side. But Professor Marandi, from the Iranian side, what are the actual considerations about its next moves? Because it appears to me that one of the key factors here is the overall situation in the region. And so, what are exactly the considerations for Iran's next move, and how hard do you believe Iran will hit Israel?
Iran will definitely respond, uh, and that's part of the question that you raised earlier on. There's no doubt Iran will respond. It has nothing to do with a change in the White House. Uh, it is inevitable, regardless of who is in the White House. But as we saw in the two previous occasions, when True Promise 1 and True Promise 2 were carried out, the Iranians waited for a host of different reasons. I can speculate on why they're waiting this time around, but I don't have any inside information. But it is quite possible that they'll strike tonight, and it's quite possible that it'll take a while. But this will be a very severe strike, and it will be much more substantial than even the previous strike, the True Promise 2 operation that was carried out. So I think the Israelis should be preparing themselves from something uh, uh, very painful. Uh, Again, I don't know when it will happen, but it's not far off. And if you recall, before the True Promise 2 operation, I was saying that it will happen, and gradually people were attacking me and saying that this is empty talk. And even Piers Morgan was saying that the Iranians are not going to strike. And literally hours later, and I told him that Iran will, and literally hours later, by chance, it had nothing to do with me, the Iranians did carry out uh, their retaliation against the Israeli regime. So it will be very significant, and I think that will be what they won't know what hit them. It will, unlike what happened in Iran when the Israelis carried out the attack, an attack on the country where it really didn't have that sort of impact on Iranians. I think that the Iranian strike on the Israeli regime will have a significant impact.
Yeah, it definitely feels like Israel has been building up a story about its late October strike and that its behavior has been far different from that of Iran's. Actually, you don't hear much about Iran's past strikes. You hear more about Iran talking about what it will do in the future. But Professor Marandi, what does this say about Israel as a whole vis-a-vis Iran? Because one of the things that I found so striking after the election of Donald Trump in November, early November, Israel, the Israeli regime, its leadership was so excited, especially around the potential of Trump's Iran policy. How do you see this? Do you believe that Israel has much to celebrate now that Donald Trump is in office vis-a-vis Iran when he actually takes the helm? Or are there different considerations that will factor into where things go from here?
Well, this is, of course, pure speculation on my behalf. But I actually think that Trump is probably not so good for the Israeli regime. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. Uh, First of all, when Trump is a very divisive figure across the world. It's not just the United States. Across the world, he is disliked. And the United States, of course, after the Holocaust in Gaza and the genocidal attacks on Lebanon, the US and the collective West, they have become discredited across the world. People see this as a Western genocide. They see it as a Holocaust being carried out with full Western support. So they are a part of this. The media, the elites, politicians, diplomats, they're all guilty of these crimes against humanity. And so the West in general, I think, has been marginalized. It has been isolated. Of course, Ukraine has its own role. The forever wars that we've seen over the past couple of decades, they've all contributed to this, the general decline of the United States. But Trump coming to power is going to add to this isolation because Trump himself is disliked by many, not everyone, not the president of Argentina. There may be elections and or changes in government in different parts of the world where allies of Trump come to power, but in general, he's disliked. So that is going to further marginalize the United States. Also, Trump has many enemies at home who will use anything that they can to undermine him. And here, you correct me if if I'm wrong, but sadly, many of the Democrats or the supporters of the Democratic Party, they were quiet about the genocide because they wanted Harris to win the election. And therefore, they really didn't protest in a meaningful way. But now that Trump is in power, I think many of them will change because they will use anything to attack Trump. And I think Gaza and Lebanon could be a part of that. So I think the protests against escalation and war in the United States have more potential under Trump, especially in bigger cities, which usually matter more. Uh, and that could cause trouble, the tensions on the streets in the United States, especially as the economy is not doing well and it will probably get worse. Not necessarily due to what Trump has done, but I think the situation for the United States is has deteriorated and it will continue to do so. The debt and many other reasons, which you have economists on your show, and I'm sure you have covered all these things. And then, of course, is the fact that Trump has pretended to be a candidate that's against war. And he has attacked Biden for wars. The focus has been on Ukraine, but he's also spoken about Gaza and Palestine. So I think it will be more difficult for Trump to convince his base, who are expecting him to make America great again, it will, to convince them that we have to enter another war. In addition to that, the region and the world has changed since 2016 when he first came to power. Iran is much stronger. The United States is in a more difficult position. Iran has many friends. Iran's relationship with Russia, with China, with countries in BRICS, with countries in the region have evolved. And the United States is more isolated, much more isolated, as I said earlier, than before. So it will be much more difficult for Trump in any conflict with Iran. Iran is also much more military capable today. Its economy is much stronger. And a war with Iran would basically mean the collapse of the global economy, because all the U.S. bases in the Persian Gulf region and in the broader region will be destroyed. But more importantly, those regimes that host U.S. bases and U.S. assets and U.S. troops, they will be seen as complicit. And therefore, the oil and gas installations, the infrastructure, the tankers, they will all be destroyed or severely damaged. And that would cause the price of oil and gas to spike. What would happen in the United States if, for example, they had gasoline at $20 a gallon, $15 to $20 a gallon? That would just bring down the economy, and that would happen across the world. And then imagine as the economy collapses, which will happen everywhere. People across the Americas, people in Africa and Asia, they'll be on the move. And they will move towards places where they traditionally go to, which is Europe and the United States. So the numbers of refugees and immigrants would spike as well. It would be catastrophic. And I think there are enough sane people in the Pentagon who understand that. Sinister, but sane. And therefore, it's going to be very difficult for Trump to move in that direction. But of course, that is what Netanyahu wants. He wants the war. He's been defeated in Gaza. He's been defeated in Lebanon. In the exchange with Iran, he's failed, and Iran will hit hard again. So no one knows what will happen. We are moving towards greater tensions, and the EU censure at the International Atomic Energy Agency, in my opinion, is being carried out with the consent of the Americans in order to create escalation between Iran and the United States. Just as the ATACMS, the using of these longer range missiles, in my opinion, is intentionally taking place now in order to create tensions, so that when there's a shift, when there's a change in power in the White House, the situation will be far more difficult for Trump. So no one knows what's going to happen, but I think it will be very difficult for the Americans to engage in any military conflict with Iran. And one thing that I should also add, and that is Trump may move instead towards maximum pressure sanctions. But the problem is that Biden never removed the maximum pressure sanctions, even though when he campaigned, he attacked Trump about the maximum pressure sanctions. But when he came to power, he refrained from removing them. And so all of those sanctions are in place. Iran is exporting, Iran is importing under maximum pressure sanctions. But the problem is that the world has changed. Iran's financial relationships with non-Western countries have evolved. They found ways where they can send their goods or send their oil or send their products, export their goods and receive their money, and vice versa, import as well. So it's going to be much more difficult than before for Trump to impose maximum pressure sanctions, especially since there are sanctions against Russia, and I don't think that they're going to be easily removed because, as I said, the Biden regime is escalating against Russia, and even if Trump wants to improve relations with Russia, it's going to be very difficult. The Europeans are trying to keep the war going alongside Biden. And in addition to that, at the negotiating table, Russia has demands. And if Trump accepts those demands, he's accepting defeat and he will be attacked for it. And if he doesn't accept Russian demands, then the Russians will continue with the war because the Russians have made many sacrifices. They're not going to give up on their demands simply because Trump came to power. Then they're not going to give up all that they've gained or the you know give some unnecessary concessions to the United States simply because of Trump. Trump will be gone in 4 years' time, and Russia will still have problems in Europe. So I think the Russians will have great expectations, and I'm not sure, or I highly doubt that Trump can meet those expectations.
Yeah, I think a key word here is chaos. And you noted so many good points about the different regional situation, the much different global situation that faces Donald Trump 2.0 regime, and the fact that a lot of people have said, Danny, there's so many war hawks in Trump's cabinet. Indeed, there are. And indeed, Donald Trump, during his first administration, was very escalatory toward Iran. But as you said, Professor Marandi, the situation is much different now. And you made a good point, too, that while I don't necessarily trust Democrats and Democratic Party voters to make
Mm.
some kind of huge mass movement against war with Iran, I do expect them to be very oppositional to most of what he wants to do. And that alone, especially at the level of the establishment, can make a difference. We saw that with the Korea talks, for example, during his first administration. So, Professor Marandi, maybe before we move on, could you just maybe summarize, especially the regional situation, if you could hint at it? Because Donald Trump is not just going to be facing Iran's potentially new and devastating strike coming up. He's always also going to be facing a regional situation that is far more complicated and complex, especially with the genocide occurring in Gaza still raging and Lebanon too.
Yes, the region has changed dramatically as well. Uh, the the countries in the region are becoming more critical of the Israeli regime, not because they want to. I think the president of Turkey has really betrayed the Palestinian cause over the last year. He continues to allow uh, oil from Azerbaijan, from Baku to go to Israel, to cheap oil to fuel the genocide. And trade still continues through third countries. We do see Jordan continuing to betray the Palestinian cause, or at least the regime in Jordan, because the people in Turkey and Jordan and Egypt, everyone in this region is extremely hostile towards the regime. We're talking about these regimes in power. So the Jordanian regime, the Egyptian regime, and in the Persian Gulf region, all of them are increasingly vulnerable, and they have to become more aggressive, at least in language, towards the Israeli regime because people are so outraged. So as time goes on, and as the Israeli regime has failed, it is becoming more difficult for them to continue the policies that they had during the first few months. Many of these governments were hoping that Hamas would collapse and that Netanyahu would take the Gaza Strip in a few months and it would be over. Many were hoping that Hezbollah would fail, and Hezbollah has done an extraordinary job. The Israeli regime is stuck on the border, and it's almost 2 months now, and they've gotten nowhere. It's amazing what Hezbollah has done. It's miraculous. They the regime, the Israelis have martyred, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, who is the um, the master of resistance uh, uh, in West Asia, and they've martyred the senior commanders, and they've destroyed so much of the infrastructure, especially of those communities and cities which are strong supporters of the resistance and the Palestinians and Hezbollah. But the Israelis have gotten nowhere, and they're taking heavy casualties. And heavy hits. And so that does not bode well for these regimes, because they were hoping that Hamas would collapse, Islamic Jihad would collapse, Ansarullah would collapse, Hezbollah, more important than any of the other groups because of the role that it plays and the history that it has, that it would collapse, and none of these happened. And so they are now facing an outraged population that sees the resistance succeeding. And it sees Iran firing missiles at the Israeli regime, and the Israeli regime failing to stop those missiles, and the Israelis saying that they're going to destroy Iran and to shake, the foundations of Iran, and nothing happened. So people are saying, well, if the Israeli regime is so weak and vulnerable, then why isn't Erdogan doing anything? Why isn't Abdullah II doing anything? Why isn't the dictator in Morocco doing anything? Why isn't al-Sisi doing anything? And so on. Why aren't the Saudis or the Emiratis, who are also as complicit as those others that are doing business with the regime? Why aren't they doing anything? So it's becoming very difficult for them, and they are forced to take a harder stance, and I think this will continue. But the most important thing is that Trump is facing a situation which could become very dangerous for the United States. If one of these regimes starts to wobble, if just one of these regimes start to wobble, that could change the map of the region completely. And with the anger and outrage that we see today, that is quite possible.
Oh, definitely. Especially even the reports, whether they're true or not, or will be born into practice. Even a country like Turkey has said that they are moving to cut all relations with Israel because of its ongoing massacres in Gaza and Lebanon. So the situation indeed is not as stable as the first Trump administration, where there was major progress made, if we can use that word, progress made into normalizing the situation for Israel with these compliant regimes in the Gulf, for example. So all of those are very good points. But Professor Marandi, I wanted to ask you now, given that we've covered the Iran situation, I wanted to put it into context because we do have reports about Hezbollah accepting a ceasefire. We have Amos Hochstein going to Lebanon to supposedly, the U.S. envoy, to supposedly solidify a ceasefire that Lebanon's government has said, and Hezbollah is part of Lebanon's government, Hezbollah has agreed to. Now, Israel is saying it's going to continue to bombard Lebanon. It's going to continue to attack Hezbollah. But I want you to react to, as well, the obvious contradiction here, where you have Hezbollah firing and conducting record numbers of assaults onto northern Israel, or what could be called northern occupied Palestine, and especially in Haifa, where there's been just a dramatic, just absolute devastation brought by Hezbollah rockets. What have you made of this overall situation regarding this talk of ceasefire? And what does it say about Israel? What does it say about the resistance and where it's at?
Well, the talk about a ceasefire is like the talk that we heard about a ceasefire in Gaza that we were hearing for so long, and it never got anywhere. At the moment, nothing has changed, and Hezbollah is not going to change its conditions. So we should ignore Western propaganda. Every few days, they're going to say something. They're going to claim that Hezbollah made new concessions, which is not true. Hezbollah is in a commanding position. The resistance in Lebanon is in a very commanding position. And the Israeli regime is in trouble, and they know it. Hezbollah and Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the collective resistance will continue until they get what they demanded from the beginning. And what they demanded was something that the Americans had accepted. If you recall, months ago, the Americans said they put forward a ceasefire proposal, and they said Hamas was against it and the Israelis supported it. But the Israelis were saying we don't accept it, and Hamas was saying that, okay, let's work on this proposal. So the Americans were lying back then, they're lying now. There will be ultimately a ceasefire, but it will be a ceasefire that is imposed on the Israeli regime. But let me actually add something here, and that is, about what you were saying at the beginning of our discussion with regards to Israeli claims about destroying a fictional nuclear weapons program. First of all, Iran's nuclear program is deep underground, and all of the key elements of the program are deep underground. There are things on the surface, but all the key components are underground. And if this mythological if this mythical uh, nuclear weapons program existed, it would be deep underground. It would not be on the surface where some missile can strike and destroy it. And why is it that the International Atomic Energy Agency has never spoken about this nuclear weapons program? I think it would be the first thing that the Israeli regime would want to do would be to ask the International Atomic Energy Agency or tell them where it is so that they can go and visit that site. They won't do that because it simply does not exist. But what I wanted to point out was that when the Israelis were striking Lebanon, they kept saying that we've destroyed Hezbollah's missile capabilities, we've destroyed Hezbollah's defense capabilities. And back then, I was also saying that Hezbollah's missile cities underground are inaccessible to the Israeli regime. And we've seen footage of a couple of them over the past few months. The Israelis cannot destroy them. And that's why Hezbollah is firing missiles. So if we go back a few months and remember, or a couple of months, and remember what the Israelis, or the last few weeks, and recall what the Israelis were saying about Lebanon, they were all lies. It was all just fake news. And so what the Israeli regime is saying about Iran, which is far more powerful, far larger, and far more capable of developing underground facilities, all of that is fake. But the situation in Lebanon right now, despite the Israeli regime targeting civilians, they're especially targeting communities and families that support the resistance. They're seeking out families. And by the way, they're seeking out medics. This is one of the really interesting things, or one of the most disturbing things, is that the Israelis hunt down medics across the country. And what is most disgusting is that, unlike in Gaza, in Lebanon, Western embassies and Western media have a permanent presence. They're there in Lebanon, they're in Beirut. They know, they see what's happening. They know that the Israelis are deliberately targeting families. In Gaza, they knew it too, but they pretended to say, well, we don't have any independent sources. The journalists in Gaza are linked to Hamas or the resistance, and that sort of nonsense. That's how they try to justify Israeli atrocities and the genocide in Gaza, and they will continue to do that for the months ahead. The Americans and the Europeans, Western media, Western diplomats, they will be on board with this genocide until the last Palestinian is killed. 1 year down the road, if this is still going on, they will continue to use the same narrative. But in Lebanon, it's impossible for them to do it because, well, they're doing it, but they don't have any excuse because they are there and they have local journalists and fixers and local staff who will tell them who these families are, who these children are who are being targeted, who these medics are who are being targeted. So that aside, though, the fact that the Israelis are targeting civilians in Lebanon, and they're also trying to create divisions between the different religious groups, and in order to and Western diplomats and Western embassies are working on this too. The Western embassies, in coordination with the Israelis, Western embassies in Lebanon, are trying to create internal strife. And their key ally, or at least one of their key allies, is Samir Jaja and the Lebanese forces, who were involved in the 1982 massacre in Beirut, the Sabra Shatila camp, where 3,500 Palestinians and Lebanese Shias were slaughtered within 36 hours. This person, Sami Jaja, and his henchmen, they are key allies of Western embassies. So the West always chooses the most evil of people as their allies wherever they are, which reflects, shows who they are. But so Western embassies are conspiring, and the Israelis and the West are working together, and Western NGOs and their people in Lebanon. But despite that, Hezbollah has done very well on the battlefield. They've been able to strike deep inside Palestine, and most importantly, the Israeli regime has succeeded in bringing everyone together in this region. All the old divisions that the West and the Israeli regime and their regional allies and proxies, all their attempts to divide the region, they failed. They tried to use religion, sectarianism, racism to divide the region. Arab versus Persian versus Kurdish, Shia versus Sunni, Muslim versus Christian. They've tried everything, one ethnic group against another. They've been doing this for over 40 years, and many billions of dollars have been spent, hundreds of billions of dollars, by U.S. proxies in the region, U.S. allies in the region, and the West. But now, today, we see that all of those attempts to divide the region, they've been swept away. And the unity among people in West Asia and North Africa is very high. And the same is true in Lebanon. The people in Lebanon and Hezbollah are on the same page. They're all together in this fight. And of course, there are those who are opposed to Hezbollah, like Sami Jaja, like the Lebanese forces, but they're a smaller, a small minority compared to what existed before. Compared to the divisions that we had before, they're much smaller today. So the country is united on the whole. The West hasn't failed to create internal strife, and Hezbollah and the Israeli regime has failed on the battlefield, and they will face more humiliation in the days ahead.
Yeah, yeah. What does this say then about Israel's so-called quote unquote strategy here? It seems to me that there's this dynamic where you have Iran so um, able to protect itself, not just because of geography, because Israel's settler expansionist tentacles cannot necessarily reach Iran at this time, but also because of Iran's military strength. But then you also have this overall situation that Israel's pursuit of quote unquote victory for itself has been to kill as many people as possible, it seems like, in Gaza and in Lebanon. But in both of these cases, Professor Marandi, Israel is still fighting very hard and unable to. A lot of people were messaging me before this stream actually to make the point that Israel has not taken a single village on the south of Lebanon, that Hezbollah has been able to beat them back each and every time. And actually, Operation People of Might, Hezbollah's overall strategy of resistance against Israel at this time, is saying that it has taken over 100 IDF troops' lives. It has injured 1,000 plus more, and it has nearly ruined 100 Israeli armored vehicles and drones. So, Professor Marty, what does it say about this overall pursuit of quote unquote victory through the destruction of the people as the resistance moves forward?
Yes, absolutely. It shows the vulnerability of the regime. I think that the injured is much higher than that, actually. But also, what has happened is that since the Israelis have been forced to take more troops away from Gaza, and remember, Hezbollah heroically, it began pounding Israeli positions from October the 8th last year in order to draw away troops from the south to help the people of Gaza and to help them defend themselves and to protect the children of Gaza from this genocide. But now the Israelis have sent most of their troops to the north, and that has helped the Palestinian resistance even more in Gaza because the Israelis have far less troops in the south than they had even a couple of months ago. And so we've seen more successes by Hamas and its allies, Islamic Jihad, in Gaza against the Israelis. And if you've seen some of the footage over the last 3-4 days, especially the footage given by Hamas, they've done some really important. They've carried out important operations against Israeli regimes, and they've killed a significant number of occupation soldiers. So now, and in Gaza, the resistance is able to again gain the initiative. One thing that I should though add here is that in northern Gaza, as you know, and as many of your viewers I'm sure know, because they're very politically aware people, and I'm sure I'm not saying anything new for many of your viewers, and I apologize for that. But in northern Gaza, we know that there's an extermination siege going on, and it's been going on for weeks now. And the Israeli regime is refusing supplies. In this starvation siege, and this is not linked to my response, I just want to add this for your viewers. The West is in bed with Israelis with regards to the starvation siege. In other words, the extermination siege. They all want to exterminate the Palestinians in northern Gaza. And the reason is very simple. If CNN, if the BBC, or any other, or these other mainstream Western media outlets, legacy media outlets, campaigned about northern Gaza, if they did rolling coverage just for a week, their governments would have so much pressure on them that they would end this. They would force the regime to end the starvation. But they won't do this because they don't want to disrupt what the Israeli regime is doing. Their diplomats won't do this. Their journalists won't do this. Their elites won't do this. Their politicians won't do this because they're all in this together to exterminate the Palestinians of northern Gaza. There's no doubt about it. Otherwise, this is the most important event. I mean, what Hezbollah is doing is outstanding, and it is absolutely amazing. But the most important thing that's happening in the world today is the extermination in northern Gaza. You have hundreds of thousands of people. I don't know the exact number. Let's say between 150 to 350, 400,000 people, whatever the number is. They are being exterminated as we speak. Not only are they being starved, but they're being hammered day and night. Just a couple of days ago, we saw them they bring down a 5-story building, slaughtering almost 100 people in one strike as they're starving these people. All CNN has to do, all MSNBC has to, forget Fox and them, they don't even pretend, but all Sky News has to do, all the New York Times has to do is to cover this day and night, 24 hours a day, for just a week, and it would end. They'd be forced to end it. Senators and congressmen and women would have to do something because it would look horrible. But they will never do that. So the starvation siege continues. And that I think is another defeat for the Israelis, because the world sees this. The world sees what's happening. The BBC cannot hide it. Sky News cannot hide it. Fox News cannot hide it. CNN, Canadian television, European, France 24, local television, none of them can hide it. the rest of the world sees it. And people across the United States and Europe, younger people, have seen it. And this, I think, is catastrophic for the regime. They're so bloodthirsty that they can't see what they're doing to themselves, but they've exposed themselves to the world as an illegitimate, deranged regime. And I think more than that's even more important than what the resistance in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Yemen, which is also astounding what they're doing. The United States is using strategic bombers to carpet bomb Yemen, but still they haven't been able to open the Red Sea. And Ansarullah continues to close the Red Sea. The ships that are heading to the Israeli ports or returning or that want to leave Israeli ports because they said we're implementing the Genocide Convention. The Americans carpet bomb Yemen to help the genocide, but the people of Yemen will, despite the carpet bombing, they will continue to implement the Genocide Convention. We are living in extraordinary times. The West has exposed itself, the collective West, to the world and to its own people. And the axis of resistance has become the hope of people across the world. Iran, Hezbollah, Ansarullah, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, Syria, which is playing a huge role, despite the fact that Erdogan and his terrorists in the north, and the United States and ISIS and its proxies in the east, and the Israelis in the south, and the Jordanians facilitating bombing raids against Syria through its airspace. All of this has not prevented Syria from, first of all, hosting 500,000 refugees from Lebanon, despite all these sanctions against Syria and all these problems, and also helping the resistance, not just in Lebanon, but in the West Bank, something that people will appreciate more in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, no, all those are great points, especially the one you made, Professor Marandi, about this connection between how critical it is to look at the absolute genocide and massacres going on against the Palestinian people and the Lebanese people and people throughout the region, where you have this going on. And of course, you have Israel, the United States, and the West being exposed as the perpetrators of such a horrific crime and crimes against humanity. And then you have the resistance. They're the ones who are putting their bodies on the line. They're sacrificing so many people to end this. And I think that contrast is a powerful one that is only set to get more powerful as what seems to me to be the suicidal thing to do for Israel, which is to try to expand this conflict to Hezbollah and Iran to an even greater degree, which, in my estimation, I don't think Israel can handle this. Your final comment on this?
Oh yes, Israel has lost the war. It cannot win in any exchange against Iran. It's doing is it's trying to create an environment for the Americans to enter the war, and that again shows the true nature of the regime and Zionists. They don't care about Americans. They want Americans to be sacrificed for their regime. They want Europeans to be sacrificed for their regime. They want the Americans to give casualties and for the global economy to be wrecked for the sake of their regime. And Netanyahu is not even doing it for the Israeli regime. He's doing it for Netanyahu. And I think Netanyahu history will say that it was Netanyahu that really brought about the destruction of the Israeli regime. I don't know when it will collapse. After there is a ceasefire, I think in Israel things will get much worse, and it will be downhill from there on very swiftly. Uh, Netanyahu may go to jail. He may be assassinated. Whatever happens to him, Israel will remember him as the person who did more than anyone else to destroy the Israeli regime. But they cannot win in any war. They can't defeat Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. They can't defeat Hezbollah. They cannot defeat Ansarullah. How are they going to defeat Iran? So their hope is that the Americans will get involved. But if the Americans do get involved, that will bring about the collapse of the global economy, because the Iranians will not allow the Americans to remain in the region. And if the Iranians begin to destroy the oil and gas assets in the Persian Gulf region or in the Caucasus, or if when the Iraqi resistance sweeps the Americans out of Iraq, I think that you will see those regimes in the Persian Gulf, those family dictatorships, they will collapse within days. Imagine if there are heavy strikes on, let's say, the Emirates. Do you think that the Emirati regime will lapse? It will fall apart in a few days, if not hours. And the slaves in the Emirates will take over the country. All those millions of slaves from across the world, from the Philippines and the subcontinent and elsewhere who are doing all the work, they will take over. It will be destroyed. So these are not regimes who can go to war. They will collapse, and so will everyone else. So I don't see a situation where the regime in Washington can win. But again, as I was saying at the beginning, I think that Biden or the deep state, or whatever you'd like to call it, and the Europeans who are affiliated to the US state, the current establishment, that they are pushing the United States towards a cliff. And whether it's, if you look at the outrageously fake assassination claims about Iran and Trump, with regards to Iran trying to assassinate Trump. If you look at the rush to provide the rest of the aid that the United States promised to Ukraine before, send it to Ukraine before January the 20th. If you see now the ATACMS being used to strike deep inside Russia, and then now, of course, the EU or the E3, the European three, the British, French, and Germans, wanting to century run in the International Atomic Energy Agency. I see all of these as linked to one another, and an attempt by the outgoing team to put the United States in a situation where Trump is stuck and he has no room for maneuver.
Yes, indeed. Professor Marandi, I had one final topic I wanted to cover with you, and it gets back to the overall situation for the resistance. And I wanted to pose the question with a little covered development that occurred on November 14th. So the United States was attempting to bomb Yemen, was attempting to bomb Sana'a, and Ansarallah demonstrated an incredible deterrence capability during this attempted operation. According to Ansarallah sources, they're saying that they use ballistic missiles, winged missiles, UAVs, unmanned aerial vehicles, and drones to repel the United States. And so this has me wondering, as we look at the overall situation across the map in the region, as the forces of resistance, the axis of resistance, responds to Israel's genocide in Gaza, its bombardment of Lebanon, but also its bombing of Yemen, and really this overall just destructive path of war it is laying. Where do you see this taking Israel and the United States from here on forward? Because Yemen is a small country. Ansar Allah, as powerful as they are not a standing military to the effect of Iran, but yet they have demonstrated something that appears to me to be absolutely unprecedented in the history of this region. So your response to this?
Ansar Allah is becoming more powerful, and their military capabilities are becoming more advanced and more sophisticated. And the Hezbollah has a lot up its sleeve too. There is a lot that hasn't been revealed, but more than anything else is Iran's capabilities. No one knows what Iran did to stop the Israelis from striking. And I should add that the Americans were deeply involved in the Israeli regime airstrike on Iran. Deeply involved. The Americans did the heavy lifting, just as they do the heavy lifting when Iran strikes the Israeli regime. They were very deeply involved in the attack on Iran. And this operation was supposed to be much bigger, but they failed from the very start. Their F-35s were picked up on radar. They simply couldn't do anything that they thought they would be able to do. And Iran's defense capabilities, its radar capabilities are still unknown. They have more hidden secrets, and Iran's offensive capabilities are still unknown to the Israelis. And we have to keep in mind that the Americans are also fighting in Ukraine, and they have escalating conflict with China. They are simply weakening themselves by fighting all these different wars and escalating on all these fronts, and also at the same time showing the world that they are genocidal. The United States, Britain, France, Germany, Brussels, the Canadians, New Zealand, the EU, Australia, they've all exposed themselves to be genocidal, these regimes. They've destroyed themselves. They've destroyed their credibility, their image across the world. But also they're depleting their capabilities through engaging in hostilities uh, on multiple fronts and against uh, multiple nations. So this is not going to end well for the West. And but I think many in the West are too arrogant to see it. They still live in their bubble of exceptionalism, American exceptionalism, Eurocentric, a sense of Eurocentric superiority. They think that somehow they'll win and somehow they'll pull through, and they'll uh, pull a rabbit out of the hat. But I just see things getting worse at a time when the U.S. economy and Western economies are in a very precarious situation. But time will tell.
Yeah, and also it feels like, for Israel, Israel is a really a pet project for the United States. It is vitally important that Israel remains a stable entity, a stable occupation entity in this region, one that is militarily capable as well. But right now, what we're seeing, it seems, is you have Yemen being able to conduct such a significant operation of deterrence against the United States. And now Israel is expected, and I'm sure this is going to be the same for the Trump administration, which has already said, we hear different things coming out of Trump's mouth of, oh, well, we don't want war with Iran. But we've also heard Trump say, well, Israel can do what it wants and finish the job. But how can it essentially, quote unquote, finish the job if it is completely and utterly mired, not just in its own just lust for blood, but also the fact that it does have to fight. The more, this is how resistance goes, the more that you do terrorize and destroy and attempt to destroy a population and a nation of people, the more fight back you are going to get. And that seems to be swelling more and more and more.
Yes, and the Israeli regime has made the term Zionism a a, uh, a very ugly word to people across the world. And in a sense, it's the ugliness of the Israeli regime and its backers is perhaps in many ways unprecedented in world history, because not only because of their sheer hypocrisy, because in the past, despots usually they killed, but they never preached at the same time. Saddam Hussein or Hitler, when he invaded Iraq or when Hitler invaded uh, Russia, he didn't preach about human rights or anything like that. They just slaughtered and moved forward. These people preach as they slaughter, but also they're slaughtering in front of a global audience. They're doing it day and night and preaching to us at the same time. So Israel, they've destroyed themselves, and the only job, if Trump, is saying that Israel should finish the job, the only thing that's going to be finished is the Israeli regime. This war is just going to make things worse for the Israelis. It's going to cement hatred for the regime. It's going to cement hatred for the West. Every day that goes by the outrage across the world, the hatred and animosity is further cemented. There's a new layer of hatred put upon the previous layer. This is not going to go away anymore. And so Israel cannot finish the job. The only thing that is going to end is the existence of the Zionist project. We will have dark days ahead. We will have dark weeks ahead. We will have painful moments in the weeks and months ahead. But I'm confident that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that this apartheid genocidal regime will ultimately come to an end, and that we will have a Palestine where, from the river to the sea, where Jews, Christians, and Muslims all have equal rights because they'll all be considered as equal human beings, unlike what Zionists believe, where they are a chosen people and others are Amalek, and we're all Amalek in their eyes.
Yeah, and that seems to be what is taking shape. A lot of the pain, a lot of the destruction, and the mass death that we've seen Israel impose on the Palestinians. One of the things I've heard is not only do you have Hamas and the overall resistance in Palestine fighting back, but you also have, because of this constant push of displacement and, of course, murder that Israel is conducting, you have Palestinians themselves. They're moving, but they're not leaving. And the same is true also for Lebanese. There's a lot of displaced, but they don't want to leave Lebanon. And what this says to me, Professor Marandi, is that there's a deep connection, it seems, between this pain that Israel is in the United States backing and is trying to inflict on people. I think the overall vision is for the United States and its Israeli regime is that the more pain you inflict, the more you can separate people from their national identity, the more you can separate people from their land, the better it is for the United States and Israel to cement their hegemony. But I think what we're seeing is actually people coming together around the resistance to this and resisting in and of themselves. It doesn't mean you have to be a member of Ansar Allah or Hamas or anything to be part of this resistance. I think we're seeing it too with the people. They want this to end, and they're sacrificing everything, their lives, everything that they have to not cower to this form of terror.
And I think perhaps the most extraordinary part of all of this, in addition to all that you've said, is that the people of Lebanon, they are being subjected to terror and to slaughter. But not only are they sticking and to their guns, not only are they holding their positions, their political positions, not only are they resisting, but they won't forsake the Palestinian people. For Hezbollah, this is not just about Lebanon. For the resistance and its supporters, it's not just about Lebanon. They will be steadfast. They will defeat the Israeli regime in Lebanon. But they are making a special sacrifice. They're making these sacrifices. They're sacrificing their children. They're sacrificing their lives for the sake of Palestine, for the sake of the children of Gaza, for the sake of the Palestinians being subjugated in the West Bank and within the 1967 borders. And I think there's something very, very special in that. And the whole region, in a sense, is doing that. Ansarullah, the Iraqis, the Syrians, Lebanon, Iran, everyone here is defending their sovereignty. They're resisting against Western domination and hegemony, but none of them are willing to forsake the Palestinian people. And I think I once said this on your show before. The Hezbollah, Iran, Ansarullah could have all done a deal with the West. And the United States would give them the world to just turn away and give up on Palestine. But that's never going to happen. And I think that is quite extraordinary. But in addition to that, and as you pointed out, this axis of resistance its resilience is amazing, but so is the broader resistance. People from beyond the region, people in the United States, in Europe, and in Asia, in Africa and Latin America, who are a part of this resistance from all religions and ethnicities and different backgrounds and different walks of life. You see a global resistance. I remember there was a young lady in Seoul who was protesting for months by herself against the genocide in Gaza, but now it's growing. These are heroes. These are unsung heroes that exist across the world, who are part of this resistance, who are making sacrifices. Many lose their jobs, many experience a lot of difficulty, but they continue to resist, not for their own sake. Someone living in Seoul or some young Jew in New York, they don't gain anything from resisting. They make sacrifices, but they're doing it for the people of Palestine. They're doing it for the people of Lebanon, the people of Syria who are being now bombed regularly. Uh, and that, I think, is something quite extraordinary.
Indeed. And finally, I believe this is why Israel is actually doomed, because there's a lot of pessimism in the collective West, I believe, even for those who are very sympathetic or even in solidarity with Palestine, where they view Palestine as kind of abandoned by the world. And you could say this is true to some degree, but if we look at the axis of resistance, indeed, there is absolutely no abandonment there. There is, as you said, a great sacrifice, one where I think you're exactly right, Professor Marandi. Of course, Hezbollah. How many ceasefire agreements has Hezbollah been presented, especially by the United States? We probably couldn't even count them since this whole thing began, October 7th, October 8th, 2023. How many times has the United States gone on the phone with Iran and said, "Hey, could you stop doing X, Y, and Z?" Around Israel. And the same could be said about Yemen. Yemen has gone through its own genocidal onslaught that still is having ramifications into today, but yet they are stepping up their operations for Palestine. So, and that doesn't even include what you just mentioned with others around the world standing in protest against what the Israeli regime is doing. So, in this sense, Professor Marandi, we can close maybe your final thoughts on, uh, you know, what exactly this says about the resistance, because to me it seems that why Israel is doomed is that this isn't going to end. It's one of those historical moments we've seen in the past where regimes like this are stood up to, and that there is this breaking point moment that often occurs where no longer is this kind of horror, which just absolutely accelerated after October 7th, 2023. No longer is this type of horror, this type of occupation, this type of system tolerated anymore.
Absolutely. And I would also add that about Iran. Iran has made great sacrifices for Palestine for 4 decades. Sanctions, maximum pressure sanctions, all these have been about Palestine. All of the attempts to undermine Iran, to impoverish Iranian society, to turn people against one another, the terror attacks that we regularly see in Iran over the decades, the war that was imposed upon Iran, all of these were about Palestine. And today, Iran is supporting the axis of resistance at a cost as well, a financial cost, not just the sanctions, but the cost of financing these groups. And also, when Iran strikes the Israeli regime and the Israelis try to strike back, these are all costs. And when the True Promise 3 comes and people across the world will be seeing it with joy, uh, that will come at a cost, and there will be a threat of expanded war. But Iran is doing this because it is unacceptable for us to see genocide in Palestine. And just as it's unacceptable for the resistance in Lebanon, and the resistance in Yemen and Syria and Iraq. It is unacceptable for Iran. And I think that this is something that should make people rethink Iran, Yemen, and the axis of resistance. Why is it that they are willing to pay such a heavy price to stop a genocide? And why is it that the forces arrayed against them are so hell bent on continuing with the Holocaust? What does this say about the axis of resistance, and what does it say about its opponents? And what its opponents have been saying about the axis of resistance for the last 4 decades. I think people should rethink Iran, rethink the axis of resistance, and look at things from a different perspective, and maybe they'll understand better the history of the last few decades. But I, in any case, am very optimistic about the future. As I said earlier, we are going to have dark days ahead. There's going to be very painful moments where you see major massacres carried out, and you'll see the Americans and Europeans justify it, and you'll see the Australians and New Zealand and Canada and everyone doing their best to preserve this this ethno-supremacist regime and to impose it on the people of the region. But it's going to fail, and people will be disturbed to see great outrages and then watch the BBC try to justify it, or CNN try to justify it, or the New York Times, or Trump, or Biden, or whoever. But I'm optimistic, and we don't have no one should none of us have the luxury of being depressed or for feeling hopeless. We all have a lot of work to do. We all should remain as active as possible because people are making huge sacrifices right now in Lebanon, in Syria, in Gaza, in the West Bank. And so it's our responsibility to do what we can to assist them.
Indeed. And Professor Marandi, we had one audience question. I'm not going to pull it up on the screen, not least because I am sharing you on the screen here, but also because some of the language, believe it or not, might get censored. So I'll just read it. This audience member who gave a super chat, Iranian Kiddo, said, "When is Iran going to avenge the death of the 4 Iranian soldiers whose lives were taken in the attack in late October? What is the wait?" We covered this a bit in the beginning. But Professor Marandi, your response.
True Promise 3 it will happen, and it's not far off. Just as True Promise 1 and 2 were very significant, and people gradually lost patience and some lost hope, but ultimately they took place. True Promise 3 will take place. It will be much bigger than True Promise 2 and much bigger than True Promise 1. And hopefully it will be a major blow to the Israeli regime, and it will force it to rethink, and hopefully the West to rethink, even though the West is pushing for escalation as we speak. And as I said, the attackings, the terror accusations, the fake terror accusations, the censure of Iran at the UN, the swift funding for Ukraine right now. I think right now they're pushing for escalation, but ultimately, I hope that with True Promise 3, that the pain will be so much that it will force the Israeli regime to rethink and to recognize that it's not going to win. And hopefully the Americans and the Europeans will see that they're faced with a force that they simply cannot defeat. And it's best to end it as swiftly for their own sake. They don't care about Palestinian lives. They don't care about Lebanese lives. Western embassies in Lebanon, instead of caring for the victims, they're conspiring against them. Mainstream Western journals, instead of telling the truth about what the Israelis are doing to Lebanon, they're trying to justify it. Whenever Lebanese civilians are being targeted, they call them Hezbollah. They say these are Hezbollah targets or Hezbollah sites or Hezbollah strongholds in order to create this fake narrative that military targets are being struck, whereas what the Israeli regime is doing is it's getting revenge on Hezbollah supporters, on resistance supporters, on supporters of the Palestinian people, those who are most dedicated to supporting the people of Gaza. But I think that True Promise 3, when it comes, the person who asked this question will have a very nice smile on his or her face.
Well, Professor Marty, it was great to be with you today. Before we head out of here, I just want to direct people to a few announcements. So first, because Nima El-Khorshid was so generous of Dialogue Works to send folks over from his live stream to this one. I know, Professor Marty, you've been on his program in the past. Please do watch his program at 3 p.m. Eastern. I just put that in the chat. 3 p.m. Eastern, he's going to be on with Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, who's also been on this program as well. So go there. The link now is in the chat. But also on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, again, same time as today's stream, I will be on with Mark Sloboda. Perhaps another guest will join later in the show. But right now, Mark Sloboda, 1 p.m. Eastern, Thursday, November 21st is when I'll be on again. With all that said, Professor Marandi, do you have any final words before we head out of here?
No, I want to thank you for inviting me. And I just want to encourage everyone to remain optimistic and to be as active as possible to help the people of Palestine and the people of Lebanon and all of those who are supporting the resistance and all those who are in the axis of resistance. Now is a very important moment, and we have to do our utmost uh, to wake up those people who are still asleep.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, Professor Marandi, it was great to be with you. Everyone, we are going to head out of
Thank
here.
you.
Hit the like button as you leave. Hit the subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Hit the notifications bell so you are notified, knock on wood, that I am going live. Go to the video description where you can find Professor Marandi's Twitter account. That's where you can find all of his reports and all of his analysis, appearances, and tweets too. And of course, go to the video description as well to find Patreon, Substack, PayPal, Buy Me a Coffee, and so many other options with which you can support this show. Without further ado, everybody, take care, and I'll see you all again in a couple days.